Can you check for me to make sure that we are well adjusted? I'm using the rare.
Salvation to this generation, shining the light of His love across the city and beyond. This is One Love Radio, inspiring, life-changing radio. One Love Radio. Osalika inyanda yakutewa kulesa musumba onse nokushirapo.
Just you want. Okay now. Yeah, you can lift it. How is that?
Yeah, it's okay.
Let's start it.
Let's see.
It's okay now? We can start.
Our mission is the proclamation of God's great love and salvation to this generation, shining the light of His love across the city and beyond. This is One Love Radio, inspiring, life-changing radio.
You are listening to the On-Air Bible School, brought to you by One Love Radio in conjunction with Oaks of Righteousness Tabernacle of the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Zambia, to equip and train pastors and lay leaders with theological knowledge and skills. For further questions and clarifications, call on 0977 526404. Muleo mfa kwiskulu lya kansha bashima pepo ili apamulabasa ukufuma kuli ba One Love Radio pamona ba Oaks of Righteousness Tabernacle aba mu Pentecostal Assemblies of God Zambia. Gamulina mepusho tumenilamia ku 0977 526404.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. This is On Air Bible School. We are back again with your favorite program. My name is Dr. Kennedy Msonda, pastor of Oaks of Righteousness Tabernacle of the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Zambia. We meet at Mika Convention Center in Minwood, Ibex.
Twami posha nge mubalandire. Twaisana kabiri ku iskulu lya Pamwela kusambilishanya pabukangala bwa kwalesa. Nationally and level Pastor Bright Musonda kulia Kapweliomba Primary School Room 10 Charleston.
Now we are starting a new course which is the survey of church history.
Tule tendeka umutwo upya ntimo okusambirira kulinga okupya okusambilishanya kwesu okwa kuchenchenta mikalire antemwa kutendeka kwa lukuta kunshikosha kunuma.
Now, last week we had an exam for Old Testament survey. We thank God for the many people that participated in the exam, including people that have not registered with us. They tried, and this time round, the majority of people performed very well. We had even one person who got 100%. So it means that people are applying themselves.
Tuwatotela omulungu wapwa tuwakweta amashindano ya pesa mbiliro ya chipangano chakale kuchencheza kwa chipangano chakale kabitu alimu na abantu abengi bali bimba mu okulemba kwa ya mashindano na badaba ko bati tabale sambirira eringi okusangwa kolero basangwa pamepusho bali abakwasuka no lero kyaliko mwishuko mukuyipeera abantu bayipeere kwali n'abalire ffe tonse.
So today we are starting a new course, which is a survey, a survey of church history.
Lero twala tendeka ngomutulandira omuntu opya kusambirishanya okucentenda kwalukuta kunshikusha kutendeka kunumoko.
And therefore we will go over in terms of what the objectives of this course are.
Echo twala tendeka nacho twala abanga bakwanshika okusambira kwesu ifirimo fyonse twala pitulukamo.
So so this course is designed to as an introduction to history of Christianity. It is also an introduction to the beginning of the church. So we are going to start from the apostolic period and we'll end just before the Reformation. So this church history 1 covers 1,000 years from it covers 1,000 years.
Okusambira kwesu kwalaba sana mukutendeka kwalukuta efyo olukuta lwa tendeke antemwa mukuba kwalukuta luleisa mukubako kulya kukwamba ero twalamba bwino mukuchenchenda mu abatumwa kabiri nomo ulukuta lwaishileta mpokula kosela no.
So during this period we are going to look at major movements that took place, leading people, personalities, and theological developments that took place during this period.
Mukusambira kwesu kwala senda imyaka okubwerera kunuma ishi 1,000 mukutendeka kwa lukuta. Elo ukusambira kwesu kuli ukwalanga ubwina Kristu mouletendeka kulukuta nomo lwapitile makamaka kuli abo bantu baikele mukutungulula nga pamuntu n'omuntu.
So once we examine these events that took place during this period, it will help you to understand a broad spectrum of Christian expressions in the history of Christianity. In other words, it will help you to understand Christianity today, where we are coming from, what has happened. Because some people think that they are like the first Christians, like they are the best Christians. I don't think today we are even half of what Christianity is supposed to be.
Nga twasambirira muri lisambiro lyakulolesha okutendeka kwa lukuta kunuma chala twafwa ukumona ubwina Kristu emo bwashika bwabela bambi abantu muri nonisa bale muna kwati ebena Kristu babere kwa bena Kristu wino kwaliko no bwina Kristu limbinga twalolesha pabwelelo bwina Kristu bwalelo no bwakutendeka twalasanga okwebati. The
other thing we need to know is to recognize the importance of protecting the church from doctrinal errors or deviations or heresies.
Ikintu kimbicho tufire twayishiba kyakwebati ichakuchingirira ichichetekero kya wina Kristo na ntemwa okumona ifilubo file ingira mu chichetekero kya wina Kristo bwine.
Because a lot of churches today have deviated from the apostolic teachings. It will also help you to learn the importance or to recognize the importance of learning from the past in terms of the choices that people made and the mistakes they made in the past.
Chala twafana kabiri okusambirira kubwikalo bakutendeka kwa wina Kristo ukumwana bayikeleshani pirubonshi bapangile bushe abayikele wino kulingana no wina Kristo nibana chala twafa okusambirira muri bonshi.
It will also help you to be spiritually challenged and encouraged by the faith of believers throughout the ages.
Chala twafana kabiri ukuba ukukoseleshewa kumwewa wina Kristo anteo umwewa bumupashibwa kwalesa nga twapituluka mukusambirira okutwala asambirira.
You also realize that the disagreements we have today did not start now. They were actually major and more serious disagreements in the church during the early days of Christianity than we even have it today.
Twalasambirira muno kumwanamo ukweba ati nokukanshana antemu empika shiri mulukuto obwelelo. Eko shali na mukutendeka limila mukutendeka kwali nempika eshachila mokuchila ne mpikea antemu okukanshana kuli nonjita.
So so today what we are going to do, we are going to look at the setting for the beginning of Christianity. What was going on at that time when Christianity started? You recall that when we are looking at the New Testament survey, we were able to look at the world of the New Testament. We gave an overview. Now this one, we are going to give you an in-depth understanding of the world of the New Testament.
Apachala tuwapwa nokuishiva bushe chalo nshi mikalile mibele nshi kulia kukutendeka ulukutalo aletendeka uwina Kristu waletendeka ngefyo tuwasambilenga tuwalosha kunu maria tuwale chenchen kwa chipangano chakale ichalo chipangano chakale chale mbelwemo na papene tuwala abakumona chamusangoyo.
So we are going to look at 3 concentric circles. We are talking about circles, a circle inside, 3 circles, a small one inside, another one in the middle, and the other one on the outside. So we are talking about an outside circle, an inside circle, and a smaller circle inside, which is the 3rd circle. So we are going to look at 3 concentric circles of the factors that affected the beginning of Christianity and the growth of Christianity.
Twalwalolesha kushunguluka ifishirwa fitatu pamukumwa fishungulu ikecha kwamba mukati chikonkelepo echa chibiri necha butatu ifiringe fishungulu kwe fishirwa.
So the world in which the New Testament started, or Christianity started, was the outer circle represents the Roman world.
Ngatwabula ukutendeka kwa lukuta ekolwa tendeke twalabika kwa chishirwa cha kunse cha shunguluka icho cyalimo no buteko wa Chiloma.
But the inside, after the 2nd circle, represents the Greek world.
Ichishirwa cha konka po mukati ka chikomulya ichakutendeka lero chili mukati chilia chilesenda ukutungululwa ndemo buteko bwa Chigiriki.
Then the inner world is the Jewish world.
Lero buli okashirwa ka mukati buteko bwa Chiyebele.
So Christianity was influenced from outside to inside. First, you are in the Roman world. The Roman government was ruling. Second, you have the culture of the Greeks, which was the culture of the time. Then, for religious purposes, you had the Jews with the Old Testament and their God, who is Yahweh.
Nga twalolesha mufishirwa echa kunse chilya icha buloma mubutungulushi icha bubiri chishirwa icha bagiriki mubutungulushi twaisa muna futi icha mukati chishirwa icha chiyebele icho chilimo ukupepa kwa kwalesa muchipangano chakale.
So we are moving from outside the outer circle to the inner circle in terms of the factors, in terms of the things that were prevailing during the time Christianity was beginning.
Okukwendanga kukonkana mufishibwa mkushunguluka tulenda okufuma kunse kwisa mkati nokuingira mkati mwana mkati.
But when it comes to the growth of Christianity, we are moving from inside to outside.
Lelonga tuwaisa kukukula kwa mushingwa wina Kristo tulenda okufuma mukishirwa cha mukati ukwishira kumise no.
So Christianity begins with the Jews, a small group of Jews who were part of the Jewish religion, Judaism. That's where Christianity begins from.
Uwina Kristo wabo munanomba muchitwa cha mukati mulya ichili cha butungulushi bwa Bayuda. Emo uwina Kristo buletendeka kuibumba feri nono ili aba yebele.
Then it starts spreading. It goes to the Greeks, and using the Greek culture and the Greek language, it is started to spread outside the world.
Liyobwina Kristo bwakula muibumbe linono mukati kachishirwa. Yatampo okukula okufumira kunse kukonga ekishirwa kya mukati kya kibiri n'okufumira kunse ekishirwa kya kunse ekya kitatu. So kireyambira mukukuma kumiikalire n'emibeere wina Kristo uleyingira mu Kigiriki. Then
finally the Christianity spreads to the Roman world.
Mukulekeresha wina Kristo nomba bwayisa ingira kufika na kubuteeko bwa kishirwa kya kulekeresha kubuteeko bwa Kiroma.
And you will understand after we have finished the discussion today that Galatians actually was fulfilled by these three concentric circles.
Ero tulepwirishisha mukusambirishanya tukapwirishanya mukesa mono kweba ati abena Galatia nibamo abalefikirisha uku kwafishirwa fitatu hivi.
Galatians 4 verse 4.
Ngatu abelenga abena Galatia chapter 4 verse 4.
Which says, when time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law.
Ilwele mbwedi letila ero inshita yafikile lesa atumi n'omwana omwaume uyo wafyerwa ku mwana gashi
under the law.
Wafyerwa ku mwana gashi mwifunde.
Now the Bible says when time had fully come. So we are going to see as we discuss today that indeed time had fully come. You know, Jesus came at a very right time, without which, if Jesus came later or if he came before, a lot of things would not, the prophecies would not have been fulfilled. Probably even Christianity would have had difficult times to spread.
Ero twala sambilisha twala mono kweba kwena ukwisa kwa Yesu Kristo aishile munshita iyalingile yafikilepo tachelelwe tavangilile afikile panshita afyero munshita iyapelwe na leso kufyalwa.
So let's begin with the influence of the Roman world in terms of beginning of Christianity.
Na tutendeke buli obuteeko bwa Kiroma emo bwabeleleko mukupela kukufyalwa kwa Yesu Kristo.
So Jesus is just born at a time when the Rome had been transitioned from a kingdom to an empire.
Yesu Kristo afyelwe kunshitaimo elio buli obuteeko bwa Kiroma bule kinjishiwo okufuma mukuteekwa n'enfumu ukutamba okuteekwa nabo baleyita tama empala.
So they were not just ruling like a tribe, they were ruling other nations. That's what an empire is.
Ubu buteeko angatolanda ti infumu shipelela mukuteeka omutundu wabo antemu ekyalo kyabo nomba ibaletila emperor bantu bamo abaleteeka okuyingishamo fye n'emitundu imbi n'efyalo fye n'enfumu shimbi mukati ka buteeko bwabo.
So that is what happened, and the place where Jesus was born was being ruled by the representatives of the emperor.
Panishita Yesu Kristo alefyalwa aliwa bali abakuyiminwako mubuteeko bwa ababaleita tama empire.
And the Jewish homeland was under the rule of the Romans.
No mushi wachi ebele wachi Yuda na waletekwa kuli abantu.
So they were, because of the way the Roman Empire was organized, it actually influenced even the way the church was structured in terms of the hierarchy, who is at the top and who is at the bottom, it followed the same structure. Particularly if you look at the Roman Catholic Church, it even bears the name of the Romans. You have the Pope, who is represented by Caesar, who was at the top, or emperor. You have cardinals. You are talking about maybe proconsuls. So the church followed the organization hierarchy of the Roman Empire.
Ngatwaisalolesha okuba munshi antema mu buteeko bwaki Roma. Twasasanga okuba ati mu butandiko bwa butungulushi bwali butandiko bwakweba ki abatungulushi kuli abakalamba n'abakonkerepo n'okukonkana n'amashina ya bukalamba bwa butungulushi antema bwa fifulo kya butungulushi.
The other major role that the Roman Empire played in the spread of Christianity is that it was a very strong empire with a very well-trained, well-disciplined army, which meant that they were able to maintain peace.
Anachimbi kyafirisheko kwisa kwa Yesu Kristo pamulandu wa buteeko bwa Kiroma. Abaloma bali kwete abashirika abachumvira abashirika abakonka amafunde bwino kabiri yali ubuteeko bwali n'amafunde ayakosa bwino.
And during peacetime and even other times, the soldiers were actually the policemen. They were playing the role of the police. It's not like today we have soldiers and then we have police, we have drug enforcement, we have anti-corruption. For them, everything was done by soldiers.
And twaisolesha kubuteeko bulya bwaweme bwaleetere n'omutende. Takyali ng'omu kibeereremu tule kimwe na leero. Kwa twayakanya kuli bali abantu balesunga amafunde bakapokola abashirika n'abanani po bambi bena bashirika fye abalese ndafyonso okumona imilandu shamu katika abantu nakunse kwa kyalo ebale ekitafyonse fya kusunga amafunde.
And the Romans also built roads, so they made it easy to travel, but also the soldiers ensured that there was safety as you were traveling, because if they caught a criminal, they crucified them.
Abaloma buli obuteeko bw'abaloma nabo bashininkisha okwe bati bapanga emisebo isuma yakwenderamu yakuseshamu ebintu n'okushininkisha okwe bati balabe n'abashirika baleelonda shiri emisebo kuti bengasanga oli omutende oba asanga alefulunganya amafunde omutende baleetanika.
So that's why you have this saying, all roads lead to Rome. Now, because of the good roads, good road network, Christians were able to travel safely to spread the message of the gospel.
Kristu kyabapeereko ekyakaniko kyakusabankanya ekyebo kyakwalesa mumutende kabiri bwangu.
Now, at that, the Romans were using Latin as a language, but remember that there was a kingdom, the Greek kingdom, which they overcame, which spread across. So in terms of the culture and the language, it was the Greek language and culture. But in terms of the people who were ruling, their culture, their language was Latin. But it was still confined to the republic, like we talked about, like chiefdom. It was not yet spread to the other chiefs who were not part of the same tribe of the Romans.
Twalolesha mukwikala kwa abantu mutundu balebomfya babomfeshe nga baloma balebomfya Latin. Lelo imbela nemikalire nemisitire ya findu mulya mwine mwaliko imbela sha Chigiriki.
It was only after 100 years or 70 years plus in the 2nd century that Latin was used to spread the message of the kingdom. And this was only done in the western part of the world. The eastern part of the world continued to use Greek.
Achali fye ni munshita ya mwanda umo. Elo chali kwa tinomba ekitundu kya kilatini kyatampa okubomfewa ero kyabomfeshe sana kunkyendeko bale litati kukabanga.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that is important about the Roman world is that they are the ones who were crucifying criminals.
Ikyali kikankala sana apa abali abalepula mu mafunde abali bakintonfu bakitalama bali abali bapanika buteeko bwa Kiroma.
You know, other empires, they would boil you, they would throw you in water, like the Babylonian kingdom, the Persian kingdoms would feed you to the lion. But it's only the Roman Empire that was crucifying criminals. And because of this, they were able to fulfill the messianic prophecies of Christ dying on the cross. And when we are saying at the right time Christ came, he came at the right time, at the time when there was a kingdom that could crucify people.
Nga twalolesha mukupanika ntala misoka bakapula bamafunde kuli abambi abaleka amabufu mubumbi bale kitako limbi okukwipika kukubika muyaka bamenshi bakwipika limo bambi bakupanika bakuposa munama bakulie lelo gatwalando ko bati Yesu Kristo ayishire panshita yadinga niryo bena abakiroma bena basendere fyo yishita imo yakupanikira bakindalama misoka bale bapanika kukubatanika ekyo tulendo ko bati Yesu Kristo ayishire panshita yadinga pantu cyali lembero ko bati akatanikwa omwana wa kwa Yesu akatanikwa.
Let's look at the Greek world.
Now,
what you realize with the Greek world, we've already mentioned that the language was Greek, education was Greek, literature was Greek, philosophy was Greek. So when Christianity was beginning, we can say that the software, we're using modern day language, the software, or let me put this way, the hardware, the outside was Roman, but the hardware the software was actually was Greek.
Nga twalolesha ku buteko bulya bumbi mu kishirwa kimbi kya bubiri kyasasanga okwebati kya Kigiriki bena mukusambirishanya bena babo mfeshe ekitundu kyabwe Kigiriki nga bayisatampa mufwaikisha efya mano bale bompye Kigiriki omwingi mubale ekire ebintu babo mfeshe Kigiriki nga twalolesha mukati kabo Mukigiriki kyayiswile n'efya Kigiriki lero mukumwona kunse kuba mwena kunse kyali kwati bakiroma.
So the world on the outside was controlled by the Romans, but in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of education, the philosophy, it was the Greek world that ruled.
Nga twalolesha mu bitekele bale bateka kunse bale muneko okutekwa ngefyo fine lelo mukati kabo nabo balinga baleeteka n'okuyisira fyonse fya Kigiriki muri bena mu kyalo kyabo.
So it's like the Greek was ruling in terms of culture, language, in terms of education, but in terms of politics the Romans were ruling.
Nga twalolesha mukuyiteka mukuyikalira muntambi na mumikalire ng'omutundu ng'ekyalo kya Kigiriki bale ekitira fyonse lero nga twayisa mukufikansa ng'efikansa fya kyalo abaloma bale bateeka.
So that's why we see that the Bible was written in a Greek language. The preaching of the gospel was done in the Greek language because Greek at that time was like the English of today.
Nga twayisa mona mu Kigiriki mu kyalo kya Kigiriki bale ekitira fyonse mu Kigiriki epamulandu wine neryo wina Kristo buleya mu nchenderya n'ekyebo kyakwalesa kyalembwa mu Kigiriki kufunda mu Kigiriki.
Yeah, so that's what happened. Greek played a major role in the New Testament in terms of the software, as we mentioned.
Ekyakitika mulya mu kipangano kipya ng'omuntu waterandira ati ifya mukati ifire ekitika mukati ng'omubalandira emufyala ekitikira.
Even just understanding of the Bible, being able to explain who God is, particularly who Jesus is, the issue of the Trinity, the issue of Jesus being the word logos, all that they employed the Greek language, the Greek philosophy, the Greek understanding.
Elo lombo wina Kristu bwainga mchalo cha Kigiriki mwe. Vena nokulondololo ifyashika lesa patatu. Bale londolwela mu Kigiriki. Ukufunda echebo chakwa lesa bale chifundila mu Kigiriki.
But so the politics, the military, the law was controlled by the Romans, or it was Roman law, Roman military, and Roman politics.
Nga twaisa lolesha mufikansa fyalo ngomo bale tongulwila yena abagiriki chalo cha Kigiriki chatungulwilwe nemibele ya Chiloma ukwisa kubushirika kufikansa fya chalo kukuchimfyanya kwa mitekele fyonse fyachitilwe kuchiloma.
But the culture of how people were doing things, how they were marrying, how they were getting educated, how they were living, it was controlled by the Greek culture.
Lelo imikalile ngo mutundu bale ichitila mutundu wa Kigiriki fyonse imichile upilwe fyonse bale upilwa muntambi mumibele yabo.
Now let's go to the Jewish world.
Na tuye nomba kuchalo cha Buyuda.
So in the Jewish world, we know first thing that Jesus was born of Jewish parents, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew 1:1 says.
Nga tuwalolesha kuchalo cha Buyuda nokulolesha Yesu Kristo twamuno kwebati afyalilwe muri kichalo cha Buyuda kuba fyashi abali abayuda.
And all his first disciples were Jewish.
Nga tuwalolesha nabasambi bakwa Yesu Kristo abakubala bali bayuda.
Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he grew up in Nazareth, and most of his ministry was done in Galilee.
Yesu Kristo afyelwe mu Bethlehem, akulile mu Galilee, o akulile
ku Nazareth.
Elo achita omulimo wingi ku Galilee.
Most people don't realize that most of the ministry of Jesus was not done in Jerusalem, but it was done in Galilee.
Abantu abengita bayishibwa kwa ati mulimo wingi Yesu Kristo achitele wachitilwe sana mu Galilee temu Bethlehem.
Now what happened is that you have Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem I think you went through Jericho. From Jericho you had to pass through Samaria to go to Galilee.
Aticha abapo mkutandikwa kwa misumbeshi kwambila ukufuma ku Jerusalem kupita mu Jericho elo kuya mu
Samaria. Samaria then Galilee.
Nomba mwalekelesha kulekelesha Galilee.
But he was crucified in Jerusalem.
Lelo Kristu ndimwa Kristu Yesu atanikilwe mu Jerusalem.
So we see that this was the Jewish culture, which also had felt the influence of the Greek culture in the first century.
Twamona ishinintambya ndemwemikalile shabayuda lelo abayuda bantu bamo abafireko nokumwana nokwenda kopanono muntambi sha Kigiriki.
But you also remember that a large portion of population of Jews still remained in other parts of the world, in Mesopotamia, and from the time of Babylonian captivity in the 6th century, which we talked about in the Old Testament survey.
Nga twayibukisha nokumona obwingi bw'abayuda bambi balisalangene mu fyalo ebyo makamaka ku Mesopotamia elo bafumishiwe mu busha kulya ku Babylon nga twamona ebyo twalisambirishyenyeko namukuchenchenta kwa chipangano cha kale.
So and you see that if you look at the way how Paul spread the gospel, he would go out and find a synagogue where the Jews would be meeting, and he would create a stir there by telling them that Christ, the Messiah they've been waiting for so many thousands of centuries, he had actually come, and that's Jesus. So some people would believe him, others would not believe him. Sometimes chaos would break out, as a result of that, but he would start a church as a result of the seed of the Jewish people that were scattered around the Mediterranean region, the Levant area that we talked about in church history in the Old Testament survey.
Nga twamuna imifundile imisabankenyishe yachewo chakwalese ya mutumwa Paulo ale ekitira mu kile yakwebati ale ya mu kyalo fimbi okutendeka mu mayanda umuli abayuda elwatendeka umulimo wakwalesa.
So we see that at that time, the other thing you need to understand is that the Jews were living under, using modern day language, colonial rule. They were colonized. They had been colonized by the Greeks under Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great died, his 4 generals divided the kingdom. But then those were defeated by the Romans.
Nga twalolesha fyo bayikela abayuda baliko ati baleba bamu abakutungululwa iringi ngevyo mukyalo kyesu twamuna twatungulwire n'ababa kuyuke amukulanda nabe baleba abakutungulwa batungulwire nga batungulwe n'abagiriki nga twamuna kuda kwali mfumu baleita Alexander elwaisa kwata n'abantu bako abali mukonka amageneral abadifo abatwalire okulatungulula.
And you find those prophesied in the book of Daniel.
Nga twalolesha emulesa abela atwamona busesemo bwalishile kuli Daniel pali butungulushi.
So during that time, the Jews were looking for a Messiah who would overthrow the Romans.
Pali lyenshita ababantu ng'abayuda nabo balefu omupusushi uwakubafa pali lyenshita okubafumya kumaboko ya Uloma yabasendere mu busha mukubatitikisha balefo umpusushi winga batungululu okubafunya mu.
That's why there's a verse in the Bible, there's a passage in the Bible, in the book of John, where when Jesus performed those miracles, they thought, this is a Messiah. And they almost forced him to become their king so that he could defeat the Romans and the Jewish nation could be as strong as it was during the time of David and Solomon.
Emulandu inenga tuamona mu ibuku lya kwayi Yohani twalasanga okwebati muri inshitaimo emo Yesu Kristu achite papo ili achite papo abayuda bebele ewiwine engaba umupusushi wesu winga tupususha kumaboko ya Baroma so balyeseshe kuti bamupatikisha bemfumu yabo engaba pususha kubutungulushi bwa Chiroma.
And Jesus just had to run away.
Yesu Kristo alubilefye abutuka alubapachani.
So that's why you see some of the things that were going on. You will have to have an understanding of what was happening at that time.
Emulandu inenga tule mune fintu fimo vile chitika chalinga twakwata okwishiba ifyale chitika namutende.
The other thing you have to understand about the Jewish world is that when we close the Old Testament with Malachi, we don't see Pharisees, we don't see Sadducees, we don't see Herodians, we don't see other sects, the scribes, of course, the teachers of the law. We don't see these groups, but we will just flip from Old Testament to the New Testament. You are faced with this whole group of new sects, of new groupings that did not exist in the Old Testament.
Emulandu inenga mwalolesha elo mwa fimbule nkupo ukufuma kwibuku lya kulekelesha mchipangano chakale mwasanga okweba ati buli obutungulushi bwa kuchipangano chakale kuleta ntikwa palukuta nga abafarisi abasadusi nabambipo abamulukuta ero twaisula kunkupo kuya mchipangano chipya tabaliko baki twamuna fye bintu byaba fye ibele fya pusana no butandiko bwa change.
So and these groups were actually created in what is called the 400 years of silence. So when you flip from Malachi, the last page, chapter of Malachi, to the first chapter of Matthew, you have actually flipped 400 years, which is called 400 years of silence, because in that period, God never spoke anything. That's why all the books that are written in between there, the apocryphal books that we looked at in the doctrinal survey, they are not inspired by God, because that period God never spoke. After speaking in Malachi, the Malachi prophesied the coming of John the Baptist, and it took 400 years.
Nga twakupukula enkupo yakulekeresha yakwa Malaki mu kipangano kya kale. Pada tuyakupukula fye twakupukula imyaka imyanda ine 400. Esho twakupukula pali lyenshita lesa alitondolo talandire kiri kyonse emulandu ine ero twamona yalama buku twalesa mbishanya mu kishinka kya kipangano ikyamabuku yalembelwe ayabula okuputwamu yalembelwe paliyo yenshita yaputwamu lesa alitondolo talandire kiri kyonse.
So we see again the importance of these sects, because it is this sect actually that instigated the crucifixion of Jesus.
Tuamona okutandika obutandika obwo nibu butandiko ubwo bwaletele n'okutandikwa kwa Yesu.
Because without them, Jesus would not have been crucified, because they are the ones who insisted, even when Pilate found Jesus had no fault, they still insisted, crucify him, crucify him.
Ubwo butandiko bwa butungulushi ebwapatikishe ebwakosele ukuti Yesu Kristu atanikwe bapundile mutanikeni butandiko bwale.
And the other thing, when he said, do you want me to crucify your king? They said, no, we have no king but Caesar. And they threatened Pilate to say, if you don't do this, we will report you to Caesar. It's like what has been happening with the I don't know what's happening now, but with the previous political parties. What would happen is that cadres would threaten even civil servants. You know, a cadre from a particular place, let's say from Livingstone, would threaten a civil servant and say, I'll report you to the president. Now, similarly, these people threatened Pilate that if he did not crucify Jesus, then they would report him to Caesar, and Caesar would remove him from office. So he feared, you know, even when he brought soldiers during the Passover, during the festivities, he was afraid of the commotion and riots. And that didn't go well with Caesar, to have confusion in his empire or the emperor. So that is the world in which Jesus was born and grew up.
Abantu elo bayimine kitinta ngombe elo nomba batwele kumfumira kuti batanike Yesu Kristo noko yati bushe tutanike mfumu yenu abayuda bapundira okwebati tatu akwata po imfumu ife twakwata fye imfumu ni Caesar, so iyo imfumu tatuishibe emulandu ine elo Caesar elo Pilate bamutwele kuti bamutanike agane bamwebere kwatwala kuseba kuli Caesar chiringe ifo chiri amakada baletinya bamo abale bomba mukuteko ukwebatinga tababombere okulingana bala batinya kuti ulyali bala basosera ku bakateka kuti bamubombepo so na ena ero baletira tuleba Caesar Pilate atina kuti atine asunkirishe batanike Yesu Kristo.
We've even heard of rumors of previous governments or parties where some ministers were removed from their position because an influential cadre actually reported the minister or the civil servant to the president and was automatically removed. So that is the same scenario. Politics have not changed.
twalimo na twalimfa kwa malanda kanwa limo kyamufiko kwe bati ulya minister ekyo bamufunisha ni pamulandu wabe ne batira bakadde eba ebele kateeka kwe bati uyu ni finefi bamufunya pamulandu abati bali amakadda balina na makayamo ayibeleleko bantu babombana kateeka.
The other important thing about the Jewish world was the issue of Jewish scriptures. These played a major role.
Ekikankala kimbi kumulandu w'abayuda kwali amalembo atandikwe mu kiyebele.
Christianity began on the basis of the Jewish scriptures, the Jewish texts.
Obwina Kristu bwatendekele pa malembo mumitandikile mumisambirire ya Kiyuda. And
the most important version of the Bible at that time was what was called the Septuagint, or the 70, it's called LXX, which representing 70 because of the 70 people that translated it. It was a Greek translation which was spread across the Roman world, the Greek world and the Roman world.
Na baibele mukulilemba kwaiko iyali kankala pali yesta niyo baletile yaleitwa yakweteka eonaka XX iyo ya sangirwe n'abantu abalirembere abali kine lubalya ntemwa 70 abalirembere lyali limo ebuku ilyayiswilemo n'ekyachi yebele kyebele.
That's why you find that there are some verses in the New Testament, when you read them, but you compare the same verse in the Old Testament, it's presented differently because the disciples were actually quoting from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, instead of the Jewish Bible, the Jewish version of the Bible. So that's why you have some slight differences sometimes in wording, because those are two different versions of the Bible that were used. So when the Bible tells us that the scripture is fully inspired, and is all scriptures is inspired by the Spirit of God and is profitable for teaching, in the correction, what they were referring to was not the New Testament, because the New Testament had not yet been written. They were referring to the Old Testament. The New Testament is written on the basis of the Old Testament. Like when we are doing
ngatwalolesha okulemba kwa Baibele okwakutendeka kwalemberwa sana mu Kigiriki nomba ngatwamona abasambi baleba kwati balefunde chebo kyakwalesa babula amalembo ya mu kipangano kyakale kazangati ero balelanda mu kipangano ekipya kiri kwati nakipusanako panono pamulandwa kuti mukutendeka lilebu kutwakiranda ili nabalembele abali
the Septuagint
ilyo Baibele balelanda ilyo bakitekelemo sana yalembero n'abali Greek so yaba ipiribula baileta mu kiyebele so kyaba kwati kyapusana ku pamulandu akwe bati kiri kwati ile mboli mulirefu mina mu bitundu bibili.
So what happens is that the quotation, what I was trying to say is that it's like you are writing an assignment and then you are referencing some books that have been written by authorities. So when the disciples, the apostles, were writing letters, you find them, they were quoting the Old Testament. And the most quoted books of the Old Testament, which was the basis for writing the letters, is Isaiah and Psalms.
Ngatwamona mukulemba kwa mabuku ili nginga ndelembe buku mulelembe buku nomba mule bula kofimo antemu amano yamo kulibalya abakalamba batendeke mukulemba so fo chali nabe naba abasambi bakwalesa abatumwa bakwa Yesu Kristo ero balelemba ekipanga mu kipya bali kwati balebula kuli bali abakalamba amabuku yali alembwa atangirirwe mukulembwa n'abakalamba ibuku ili lyo balebula mo sana balebula mo sana ili akwa Isaiah
and Psalms.
na malumbo.
So when Christianity started, the God of the Jews became the God of the Christians.
Ero wina Kristo buletendeka lesa w'abayuda aishileba lesa w'abena Kristo.
The Bible of the Jews became the Bible of the Christians.
Ichipingo ch'abayuda chaishileba chipingo chabena Kristo.
The son of Abraham, the son of David, the Messiah who was promised to Abraham by God, who became the leading figure of Christianity, is the Messiah of the Jews.
Umupusushi baleka bil'abayuda. Umupusushi wali w'abayuda. Umupusushi umowine uwaishileba umupusushi wabena Kristo antemwa umutu wabena Kristo.
Understanding of things like forgiveness, understanding the things like sacrifice, and many other concepts, holiness, all these concepts were understood or were used by Christians on the basis of the Old Testament.
Nga twaisa mona mukwiluka okwishiba kwa kwelela ukwakutemwa ukwakupela obulilambo ukwakwitula muli bumushilo fyonse efi fyaisaba nakubena Kristo ukufuma kubayuda ntemwa mu kipangano kya kale.
So the story of the early Christianity is the story of how a religious movement that began as a sect within Judaism spread and successfully made a transition to a larger Greek and Roman world, and eventually by the 4th century it was recognized as the religion of the Roman Empire.
Twaisa mona ibumba feri nono liletendeka pakati k'abayuda lyaba libumba limo ilyasalangana okuya munchendesha lekana okuyisa na kunkulo ya chine yasalangana nomba yaitwa tebumba feri nono elobuka pepa.
So here is a big question, and we are going to okay, before we ask the big question, let me just go, so explain briefly, time has run out, is that the book of Acts actually records how Christianity started and how it spread. How Christianity started and spread is recorded in the book of Acts. So you see that Acts chapter 1, verse 1 to Acts 6, verse 7, it describes how the church started in Jerusalem.
Anga tuamona emilimo y'abatumwa chapter 1 kufika pa chapter 6 atwala mona efyo emilimo y'abatumwa ilerondola wino efyo lukuta lwatendeke
in Jerusalem.
Mu Jerusalem.
In Acts 6 verse 8 to Acts 9 verse 31,
nga tuamona emilimo y'abatumwa chapter 6 kufika pa
6 verse 8 to 9 31,
kufika pa verse 8 to 9.
So here it describes the geographic expansion of the church to the Greek-speaking Jews, up to Samaria.
Twala mona efyo lukutana lolule sabankana munchendesha lekana okufika fena kuja ku Samaria.
So, and then we have other, as you follow this, you find that Christianity spreads now to the rest of the Roman Empire.
Gatwakonka mo efyo filenda munchendesha lekana twala mono kwebati ubwina Kristo nomba bwayingila na muteko na mumfyalo fyabaloma.
So let's ask the question we wanted to ask.
Na twipushe nomba buli obwipusho twachafu twipushe.
Could anything be more improbable than that a religion following a man born of an unwedded mother a widely dispersed people in and out of the way of the world? That, in other words, how possible is it that a religion that was started by a man born out of wedlock, for lack of a better term, of people who were despised, in the far corner of the world.
Uwipusha wakweba ati bushe ukapepa ubwo bwatendekefye n'omuntu wasulwa omuntu wafyelwe kuba fyashaba shapitire n'okubofya bwino ng'owinga lero afyelwe fye munchende imo yasulwako kutibwa kula bukapepa omusango oyo.
A man was crucified by the ruling authority on a charge of treason.
Umuntu obapele ng'omulandu wakula wakwimina obuteko eo bukapepa bwakwe bwingaba kusalangana ebinango okukulera.
How can such a religion be an official religion of the Roman world?
Bushe obubwine bukapepa kuti bwabashani ubwapulamu ku kyalo kya Kiroma
and influences Western civilization and the rest, and influences the rest of the world as we know it.
Obubwine bukapepa obubula ekimfya n'okuterentensha isonde lyonse mu miteekerere mu mikalire yonse esonde na mu byalo byonse.
It could just be God.
Obubukapepa kuti bwabafye bwapulamu lesa.
We'll continue next week. I will continue tomorrow with lesson 2, which will be focusing on what happened when Christianity started spreading to the rest of the Roman Empire, as we've begun to discuss.
Tukatwalira okusambirishanya ukumona efyo ubwina Kristo bwatwalira okulasabankanya ukusabankana ukuya mu kyalo kya Baloma.
So we'll see you tomorrow after the 13 hours news. God bless you.
Tukamona na palo amailo pa chibelushi panuma ya kubelenga kwa nyushi ya 13 hours.
The On-Air Bible School was brought to you by One Love Radio in conjunction with Oaks of Righteousness Tabernacle of the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Zambia to equip and train pastors and lay leaders with theological knowledge and skills. For further clarification and questions, call on 0977 526404. Be sure to tune in again next time. God bless you.
Are you ready to make a difference through the power of prayer? Here at One Love Radio, we believe in the strength of unity in prayer. Matthew 18, verse 20, Jesus said, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them."
Yes.
And in James 5, verse 16, we are reminded that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. We invite you